You know, one of my favorite holidays is Thanksgiving. And one of the holidays I hate the most is Thanksgiving. And I want to talk about that. I'm your boy Nakasuchi, and this is The Raging Atheist. As a history buff, I despise it when history is whitewashed. And you know, America has whitewashed their history from its inception. They've never really liked to talk about the bad things they do. They like to glorify itself, as any nation does. This is natural behavior. But I really despise how we've changed the narrative. Like right now, textbooks are being changed to say that the Native Americans peacefully and voluntarily moved from their homes to make room for the settlers in the East, when that didn't happen. That's not what history says. And one of the greatest myths about history, one of the stories that all of us as Americans have known since we were little children and we were old enough to understand what Thanksgiving was and understand the stories we were being told, is the story of the Pilgrims and the Indians. And it's just a bullshit story, and this holiday that we base on this lie needs to be changed and made into what it really has become, and that's what I want to do with this video. Yesterday was Thanksgiving, at least tomorrow's Thanksgiving, but when I upload this video, yesterday will have been Thanksgiving. So I don't quite know if my Lions won their game against the Vikings. I don't know. I believe it's the Vikings we're playing. This is an important game. I don't know if we won that game, but I do know that I really enjoyed the food I ate, even though I haven't eaten it yet. I just love Thanksgiving. It's one of my favorite holidays, and I've said that. But I hate the lie that it's based on. And the lie that it's based on is that the Pilgrims and the natives had this feast, and everything was happy and merry, and the Pilgrims, you know, were men of their words, and the natives were gentle. And I just hate that whole narrative because it's not true. You know what Thanksgiving is to the Native Americans? It's not a day of thankfulness. Thanksgiving to the Native Americans, most Native Americans in this country, is a day of mourning. It is a day of sadness, of great sadness, a day of remembrance for everything they have lost, everything that we have taken. You know, a lie that we're told since we're kids, and it's still preached in history classes today, is that the Puritans, the Pilgrims, they came here escaping religious persecution in England, right? That's a lie. That did not happen. History does not say that. The Pilgrims had already escaped that religious persecution in England and had moved to Denmark and had integrated with the Dutch, who were very progressive liberal thinkers for their time. And you know, the Dutch welcomed them, so they had escaped that religious persecution. And when they had escaped that religious persecution, they couldn't leave that shit alone, because their religion is right, the Church of England is wrong. So they started dropping pamphlets all over England, all over London, about how they needed to separate from the Anglo Church of England, and they need to be more Puritan, which is more conservative in their religious ideology. See, these Pilgrims weren't the free thinkers that they are portrayed to be. They weren't the kind, gentle souls that they were portrayed to be. They were bigoted, extreme religious people. Another myth about the Pilgrims is that they're the only ones that came over on the Mayflower. Now, history buffs, they know this. Most people just assume, oh, the Mayflower, that belonged to the Pilgrims, because they don't actually study history. But no, the Pilgrims were not the only people on the Mayflower. There were two groups of people on the Mayflower. There were the Pilgrims, the Puritans, whom the sailors despised because they were some wacky-ass religious people. You know, I mean, dressed from head to toe like quiverful people today. And we're going to be talking about quiverful next week on The Raging Atheist, so stay tuned for that video. It's going to be a huge video. But you know, these Puritans were dressed from head to toe, all modest. They were extreme fundamentalist right-wing Christians. That's what we would call them today. I mean, crazy. And then the other group were people seeking fortune in the New World. So the Puritans were called the Saints, and this other group was called the Strangers. So when Plymouth was created, it wasn't just a secular or it wasn't just a religious colony, it had to be a secular colony because there were people that didn't subscribe to that crazy ass religion. But I'm getting ahead of myself because, you know, they had to travel first and they weren't very smart, so they decided to travel pretty much during the worst period of the year to travel the Atlantic Ocean. And it took them 65 days to get all the way across because they were bombarded by storm after storm. They lost people to sickness and disease from this journey. Malnutrition, vitamin C deficiency, eating too much salt because the meat had to be extremely salted to preserve it for these long voyages back then. So they had lost a good chunk of their people by the time 65 days later that they finally actually showed up to the New World, blown off course because they were supposed to hit New York and they ended up hitting Cape Cod. So what's even more disastrous is if they had left earlier, if they had traveled the seas when the seas would have been more complimentary to their voyage, they would have actually landed in Cape Cod when the natives of that land were still there and would have been able to actually help them get set up before the natives had left for the winter. See, the natives, they migrated away from Cape Cod for the winter because it just wasn't good land and it was a very harsh winter. So when the Pilgrims did show up, off course, there was nobody there. They found an empty beach. They found empty land. And it took them a while, and they're getting disheartened. And you know, and you have to understand that they feared the Native American before they ever showed up. The Spain and the Portuguese had demonized the Native Americans, portrayed them as cannibals that ate human beings, as ruthless savages. So they were deeply afraid of these natives that weren't even there. So they get there, and it's a harsh winter, and they start losing people. But even before that, when Bradford took his party and they were exploring the beach, then they found a catch of corn that was, you know, seed crop for the next spring for the natives. They took it and they left a note saying, hey, we will pay you back later. They never paid them back later, and Native Americans to this day joke about how it all started with a lie. So they start building their houses right around Christmas, and they get through the rest of this winter. We don't call it their first winter because it wasn't a full winter and they weren't established, but they lose 50% of the people that had survived the journey over. They lose 50% of their colony just due to the harsh winter conditions, due to the lack of food, not having any crops, being cold, being exposed. 50%. And in March, the Native Americans finally come back, and they send Somerset, a representative that can speak English, and he walks right into the camp unafraid of anybody, unafraid of these English, because the Native Americans had already come to a conclusion before they had ever even shown back up. You see, a few years prior to that, John Smith had shown up on his way to found his colony farther south. And when he showed up, he brought things with him. And one of these things was disease, and diseases that we know from European society that they had immunities to these diseases, and we have immunities to these diseases today. Chickenpox and the mumps and stuff like that. But the Native Americans had never been exposed to these diseases before. So what happened was these diseases spread through the Native American tribes on the East Coast like wildfire, and it already killed over about 80% of their population by the time the Pilgrims had shown up. So when the Pilgrims had shown up, the chief Mattisau, and I'm butchering his name, forgive me, it's really hard to pronounce Native American names. I was never raised in that language. But this chief, the chief of the Wampanoag people, he knew that he didn't want to mess with the English again, so he was going to be friends with them. And he approached them with friendship, and they signed a treaty, and they taught the settlers how to grow corn because, you know, the settler seed from Europe, it just wasn't working in this American soil. And they taught them how to grow American crops, and they taught them how to hunt the land and till the land and do the things they needed to do to survive. And this treaty was mutual for both sides. You know, the Indians needed to be friends with the Europeans at this moment because they had been so decimated. Now, it was a mistake because at first, if the Indians had wanted to, they could have driven the Europeans off of their land. They had the numbers. but they didn't. And a lot of that was the chief's interpreter, Squanto, who had been deeply influenced by European culture when John Smith had came and didn't want no part to do with the Europeans. So he really promoted this and encouraged this chief to become friends with the Pilgrims. And this was beneficial, and this helped both sides, don't get me wrong. And the Europeans, the Pilgrims were thankful but they were thankful because they were going to die otherwise. Now, if they could have done it without any help from these heathens, I truly believe that war would have broken out a long time before it did. But they were thankful, so for that first harvest, they did invite the Native Americans in. And this wasn't a universal feast for thankfulness from God. This was a specific feast in thanks of the Native Americans that had saved their asses. And as I said, you know, this treaty was beneficial to both sides, and it would last through William Bradford's life and the chief's life. I'm not going to butcher his name again. It would last for over 50 years. But more and more European settlers were coming, taking more and more Native American land. And the Native Americans didn't really like the European civilization trampling and destroying the earth. So you see that they were two different cultures. The natives believed in preserving the earth, taking care of the earth, where European society has always dominated the earth. Very different cultures, very different philosophies on life itself. So after 50 years of peace, there was war. There was war. And those Pilgrims, when they won that war, sold off those Indians as slaves. So I really hope you guys had a really great Thanksgiving holiday. And I particularly did not make this video to upload it before Thanksgiving in order not to bring bad energy on your Thanksgiving holiday. But now that Thanksgiving's over with, I implore you guys just to think about the history. Study the history. Remember what we did to the natives. Study what we did to the natives leading up till today, because we raped them. We murdered them. We sent their children to boarding schools to try to make them imitation white people. We have decimated their numbers to where this very day they are an endangered species dying. And we just can't wait for that last full-blooded Indian to be gone, because that means this land will truly be ours then. These people were great people that did not like the society that has led to climate change, that has led to globalization, that has led to the complete corruption of the ecosystems of this world, that has led to oil pipelines running through water sources. You see, if we wouldn't have seen the Indians as savages and been open to what they could have taught us, maybe we wouldn't be in the predicament we are today. And I think it's highly time that we change this holiday and we stop telling this lie and we start recognizing what we did to this proud people, what we did to the Native Americans, to the indigenous peoples of this land when we took it from them at the point of a sword and a gun. As always, I'm your boy Nakasuchi. This is The Raging Atheist. If you like my video, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, share me on your social media, comment in the comment section below. I'll see you soon.